What if the war films that hit the hardest were never the loudest ones? What if the movies that truly understood fear, survival, and sacrifice were quietly pushed aside while bigger titles took the spotlight? These are not comfort watches. These are stories that stay with you. Halfway through this list, things turn far heavier than expected, and by the end, you might realize respect isn't about popularity, it's about impact. Number 11, Saints and Soldiers, 2003. This film doesn't start with spectacle. It starts with silence, snow, exhaustion, and a group of soldiers who already look like they've been through too much. Saints and Soldiers follows a small American unit trapped behind enemy lines during the final stretch of World War II. No grand speeches, no heroic posing, just men trying to make it home. What makes this film hit hard is its restraint. The story focuses on conversation, fear, and moral pressure instead of constant action. You feel the cold, you feel the uncertainty, and you feel how one wrong decision could end everything. The characters aren't symbols. They feel real, tired, sometimes unsure, sometimes brave in quiet ways. The film was made on a modest budget, and you can feel that creativity working overtime. Smart framing, careful pacing, emotional weight instead of noise. It asks uncomfortable questions about duty, loyalty, and what survival really costs. Saints and Soldiers never pretended to be a blockbuster, and that's exactly why it works. It respects the audience enough to slow down, and in doing so, it earns something far more valuable than attention. It earns trust. Number 10, Hamburger Hill, 1987. This film is exhausting, and that's the point. Hamburger Hill focuses on one brutal objective during the Vietnam War, where soldiers are ordered to take the same hill again and again. The terrain never changes, the outcome barely moves, and the cost keeps rising. There is no glory here, just repetition and fatigue. What makes this movie so overlooked is how uncomfortable it is. There's no clear hero arc, no tidy resolution. Instead, the film shows how confusion, frustration, and pressure slowly grind people down. You feel the boredom between moments. You feel the waiting. And when things finally erupt, it feels sudden and overwhelming. The performances are raw and unpolished in the best way. These soldiers argue, they joke, they break down. And sometimes they question why they're even there. That honesty is what gives the film its power. Hamburger Hill doesn't try to explain the war. It simply drops you inside one small piece of it and refuses to soften the edges. That refusal is exactly why it deserves far more respect than it gets. Number 9, Land and Freedom, 1995. This film sneaks up on you. Land and Freedom begins with a young man traveling to Spain to join a cause he barely understands. What follows is not a simple story of right and wrong, but a deeply human look at belief, division, and disappointment during the Spanish Civil War. The most powerful moments aren't loud. They're conversations, arguments in dusty rooms, people realizing that shared goals don't always mean shared values. The film slows down to show how internal conflict can be just as damaging as anything happening on the battlefield. Director Ken Loach keeps everything grounded. No flashy camera work, no dramatic shortcuts. Just people making choices and living with the results. You feel how ideals can fracture under pressure, and how unity can disappear faster than expected. Land and Freedom isn't interested in easy answers. It's interested in truth, and that honesty makes it one of the most emotionally sharp war films of its era. It doesn't shout to be remembered. It waits quietly, and once it settles in, it doesn't leave. Number 8, Soldier of Orange, 1977. Before he became a global name, director Paul Verhoeven made this gripping story about resistance, loyalty, and betrayal during World War II. Soldier of Orange follows a group of Dutch friends whose lives split in completely different directions after occupation begins. Some resist, some cooperate, some try to survive without choosing sides, and those choices slowly tear everything apart. What makes this film special is how personal it feels. These aren't strangers. They're classmates, teammates, friends. Watching them drift into opposing paths is uncomfortable because it feels believable. There are no villains drawn in simple lines, just people reacting differently to the same fear. The film builds tension through relationships rather than action. A glance can mean danger. A conversation can change everything. And by the end, the emotional weight is heavier than any explosion could be. Soldier of Orange doesn't ask you to judge, it asks you to observe. And that perspective makes it one of the most mature and overlooked war films ever made. Number 7. The Siege of Jadotville, 2016. This story feels impossible until you realize it actually happened. The Siege of Jadotville tells the story of a small Irish peacekeeping unit surrounded during a conflict in the Congo. Outnumbered, isolated, and largely forgotten. What follows is a tense stand where preparation, discipline, and leadership matter more than size. What makes this film hit so hard is its focus on professionalism. These soldiers aren't reckless. They're careful, calm, focused. The tension comes from watching them adapt under pressure, knowing help may never arrive. The film avoids flashy shortcuts. Instead, it builds suspense through time. Waiting, listening, holding ground. You feel the weight of every decision because the stakes are always clear. For years, this story went unnoticed, and that silence mirrors the film's theme perfectly. Jadotville is about people who did their job and were ignored for it. This movie gives them the recognition they deserved, and once you see it, it's hard to forget. Number 6. Waltz with Bashir, 2008. This is not a war film that explains things to you, it asks you to feel them. Waltz with Bashir uses animation to explore memory, confusion, and emotional damage tied to conflict in Lebanon. At first, the style feels distant, almost unreal, but that distance is intentional, because this story is about forgotten moments slowly pushing their way back to the surface. The film follows a former soldier trying to understand gaps in his own memory. Conversations turn into fragments, images repeat, scenes feel dreamlike, and that's exactly how memory works under pressure. Nothing is clear, everything is distorted. What makes this film hit hard is restraint. There is no shouting, no dramatic framing, just slow realizations that land heavier with each scene. When clarity finally arrives, it feels earned and unsettling. Waltz with Bashir proves that war stories do not need realism to feel real. Sometimes abstraction tells the truth better than detail. This film deserves respect for daring to be different and succeeding in ways few others have. Number 5. Tae Guk Gi, 2004. This film starts as a family story, and that's why it hurts so much when everything breaks apart. Tae Guk Gi follows two brothers pulled into the Korean War under sudden and brutal circumstances. One is protective, one is hopeful, and both are unprepared for what lies ahead. The film tracks how survival slowly reshapes them into people they barely recognize. What sets this movie apart is its emotional scale. Every choice carries weight. Every reunion feels fragile. The bond between the brothers is the core of the story, and watching it stretch under pressure is painful in the most honest way. The film does not rush. It lets moments breathe. You feel the exhaustion, the confusion, the cost of loyalty when systems collapse. By the time the story reaches its final act, the emotional impact feels overwhelming but deserved. Tae Guk Gi is not just about conflict. It's about what happens when love is forced to adapt to chaos, and that makes it unforgettable. Number 4. The Forgotten Battle, 2020. This film asks a simple question. What if one of the most important battles was barely remembered? The Forgotten Battle focuses on the Battle of the Scheldt during World War II, told through multiple perspectives. A Dutch fighter, a British pilot, a young recruit. Each story overlaps, showing how different lives collide inside the same struggle. What makes this film powerful is balance. It does not glorify. It does not lecture. It observes. You see how choices ripple outward, how fear spreads, and how survival sometimes depends on cooperation between people who barely trust each other. The pacing is steady, the tone is grounded, and the emotional weight builds quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore. This is a film that respects history without turning it into spectacle. The forgotten battle deserves more attention because it reminds us that importance does not always equal fame. Some stories are buried simply because they happen too far from the spotlight. Number 3. The Wind That Shakes the Barley, 2006. This film begins with hope and then slowly strips it away. Set during the Irish War of Independence, The Wind That Shakes the Barley follows brothers pulled into a movement that promises freedom but delivers impossible choices. What starts as resistance soon turns inward, fracturing families and friendships. The film's strength lies in its intimacy. The camera stays close. Conversations feel personal. Arguments feel unresolved. You are never allowed to feel comfortable with any decision being made. There are no clean victories here. Every gain feels temporary. Every loss feels permanent. And that emotional imbalance is the point. The film shows how conflict reshapes values and forces people to live with decisions they never imagined making. This is a war film about consequences, and it treats them with brutal honesty. That courage alone earns it a place near the top. Number 2. La Grande Illusion, 1937. Long before modern war films existed, this movie understood something timeless. La Grande Illusion focuses on prisoners during World War I, but the real subject is class, humanity, and the illusion of division. Officers and guards speak the same language, share the same habits, and slowly realize how artificial their differences really are. The film avoids action almost entirely. Instead, it builds tension through conversation and observation. Small gestures matter. Courtesy becomes meaningful. And respect crosses lines that were supposed to be permanent. What makes this film remarkable is how modern it feels. Its message has not aged. If anything, it feels sharper now. The idea that systems divide people more than beliefs remains painfully relevant. La Grande Illusion proves that war films do not need intensity to leave impact. Sometimes insight is the sharpest tool of all.
Number 1. Lifeboat, 1944. At the very top is a war film that removes the battlefield entirely and still feels suffocating. Lifeboat takes place almost entirely on a single rescue boat after a ship is lost during World War II. Survivors from different backgrounds are forced together in open water with nowhere to go. No escape, no privacy, just heat, hunger, fear, and rising tension. What makes this film extraordinary is how quickly the conflict turns inward. There are no large movements or sweeping visuals. Instead, the danger comes from conversation, silence, and trust slowly breaking apart. Every look matters. Every word feels heavy. Leadership becomes unclear. Morality becomes flexible. Director Alfred Hitchcock turns survival into a psychological test. The enemy is not always visible. Sometimes it sits right beside you. The film asks uncomfortable questions about cooperation, fear, and how quickly people redraw their values when survival is at stake. Lifeboat was daring for its time and still feels bold today. It proves that war stories do not need scale to hit hard. They need pressure, they need people, and they need honesty. This is a quiet, intense reminder that war follows people even after the noise fades. And that timeless impact is why it deserves the top spot. These films prove that respect isn't earned through noise or numbers. It's earned through honesty, through stories that linger long after the screen fades. If one of these surprised you, let me know which one hit hardest. Share this list with someone who thinks they've seen every great war film. And remember, sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones history almost forgot.